I'm Brigadier General Maggie Hale, 35 years old, and I worked my way up from an intel analyst at Fort Meade to the Pentagon's Defense Command Strategy Division. For years, I watched over my father, a disabled Army colonel who gave this country everything he had, making sure the system he served would never forget him. But when a judge looked him in the eye, called his medals fake, and stripped his pension in front of strangers, I made a choice that changed both of our lives. Have you ever been humiliated by someone who thought they could get away with it? Someone who mistook your silence for weakness? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from, and if you've ever had to stand up for yourself or someone you love, hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about boundaries, loyalty, and quiet revenge. What happened next might surprise you. It started small. The way Judge Everett Cole interrupted my father mid-sentence during the first pension review. Dad's hand trembled slightly on his cane, but he kept his tone respectful. "Sir, I served 22 years. Combat tours," Cole cut him off. "Everyone served somewhere, Mr. Hale. Medals don't pay rent." Something about that smirk stayed with me, rehearsed arrogance, the kind that grows behind closed-door power. At first, I thought he was just another bureaucrat with a god complex. But his reach was wider than I expected: veterans boards, local bar association, even political donors. He wasn't careless. He was deliberate. And he'd chosen the wrong man to humiliate. I'd driven Dad to the hearing that morning. He'd been up since 5, ironing his one good shirt, polishing the brass buttons on his uniform jacket even though he knew he wouldn't wear it. The jacket hung in his closet now, too tight across shoulders that had once carried a 70-pound pack through the Helmand province. But the ritual mattered to him. Preparation was respect, he'd always said. Respect for the process, even when the process didn't respect him back. The Veterans Affairs building sat on the edge of town, a squat concrete structure that looked more like a DMV than a place where men's futures got decided. We arrived early. Dad hated being late to anything. He used his cane to push himself out of the passenger seat, waving off my hand when I reached to help. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed over linoleum floors. A clerk directed us to the 3rd floor, where Judge Cole presided over disability reviews and pension appeals. The waiting room smelled like burnt coffee and old paper. Dad sat with his back straight, hands folded over the handle of his cane, while other veterans slumped in plastic chairs around us. Some were younger than me. One kid couldn't have been more than 25, his prosthetic leg visible below his shorts. Another man, older, kept his eyes on the floor, fingers tapping a rhythm only he could hear. When they called Dad's name, he stood without hesitation. I followed him into the hearing room, a cramped space with wood paneling that had gone dark with age. Judge Cole sat behind an elevated desk, looking down at us like we were defendants in a criminal trial rather than a decorated veteran asking for what he'd earned. Cole was younger than I'd expected, maybe 50, with silver hair styled too precisely and a wedding ring that caught the light when he gestured. He didn't stand when we entered. Didn't acknowledge me at all. His eyes went straight to Dad, then to the folder in front of him. "Colonel Hale," Cole said, not looking up. "Or is it Mr. now?" Dad's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. "Retired, sir. Colonel Mason Hale, United States Army." Cole flipped through papers. "Says here you're claiming full disability. Requesting continued pension benefits." "That's correct, Your Honor. I've been receiving those benefits for 6 years now, since my medical retirement." "And you're here because?" "Annual review, sir. Standard procedure." Cole leaned back in his chair, eyes finally lifting to meet Dad's. "I see. And these combat injuries you're claiming, where did they occur?" Dad's hand tightened on his cane. "Afghanistan, sir. Kandahar Province, 2009. IED strike during a convoy escort. Lost partial function in my left leg, took shrapnel in my back and shoulder." "Anyone can say that." "It's documented in my file, sir. Medical records from Walter Reed, discharge papers, service record. I can read, Colonel." Cole's tone had shifted, taken on an edge that made the clerk in the corner glance up nervously. "What I'm asking is whether your injuries actually prevent you from working." Dad's voice stayed steady. "I have permanent nerve damage, Your Honor. I can't stand for more than 20 minutes without significant pain. I can't lift anything over 15 pounds. I have limited mobility, but you drove here. My daughter drove me, sir. Cole's eyes flicked to me for the first time, dismissive, then back to Dad. You can sit, can't you? Use a computer? There are plenty of jobs that don't require physical labor. I've tried, sir. The pain medication affects my concentration. The VA doctors have documented the VA will document anything to justify their budget. Dad went very still. I'd seen that stillness before, the moment before he'd correct one of his soldiers. But here, he had no authority. Here, he was just another old man with a cane, asking for help from someone who'd never worn a uniform. Sir, Dad said carefully, I'm not asking for charity. I served my country for over 2 decades. I fulfilled my duty. The pension isn't a gift, it's part of the contract I signed when I enlisted. Cole made a notation on his papers. A lot of people serve, Mr. Hale. Most of them don't need the government to support them for the rest of their lives. The way he said Mr. Hale, dropping the rank, was deliberate. Dad's hand trembled on his cane, but his voice didn't waver. I'm not asking to be supported, sir. I'm asking for what I was promised. What I earned. By doing what exactly? By serving in combat. By leading soldiers. By everyone says they served in combat. Cole's voice had gone cold. Everyone claims they were heroes. But when I look at your file, what I see is a lot of paperwork and not much proof. I felt something shift in my chest, something cold and precise. Dad opened his mouth to respond, but Cole kept talking. These medals you've listed: Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Legion of Merit. Impressive. If they're real. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the clerk had stopped typing. Dad's face had gone pale, 2 spots of color high on his cheeks. Sir, he said quietly, my medals are authenticated. They're registered with anyone can buy medals online, Mr. Hale. Happens all the time. Stolen valor, they call it. I stood. Dad shot me a warning glance, but I was already moving forward, placing my briefcase on the table between us and Cole. Your Honor, I said, my voice level, my father's service record is fully documented and verified. His medals are registered with the Defense Department. His injuries are confirmed by multiple independent medical evaluations. If you'd like, I can provide. Cole cut me off. And you are? Maggie Hale. I'm representing my father in this proceeding. You're a lawyer? I work for the Department of Defense. Something flickered in Cole's expression, but it was gone before I could read it. Well, Miss Hale, your father is here to prove his case, not to have you make speeches on his behalf. I smiled. It was the smile I'd learned in briefing rooms, the one that meant I knew something you didn't. Of course, Your Honor. My apologies. I sat back down. Dad was watching me, concern etched in the lines around his eyes. He knew that smile too. Cole returned his attention to the papers in front of him, making notes with a gold pen. Finally, he looked up. Mr. Hale, I'm going to recommend a suspension of your benefits pending further investigation. The words hit like a physical blow. Dad's hand gripped his cane hard enough that his knuckles went white. Investigation of what, sir? Of whether your service record and medical claims are legitimate. Whether these medals are authentic. Whether you actually earned the benefits you're claiming. Your Honor, Dad's voice cracked, just slightly. I need those benefits. My medication alone costs, that's not my concern. Cole closed the folder. If everything checks out, you'll be reinstated. Until then, consider your pension suspended. He stood, preparing to leave. Dad stayed seated, staring at the closed folder like it was a door that had just slammed in his face. And that's when Cole made his mistake. He looked down at Dad, at the man who'd spent 22 years in service of something bigger than himself, and he smiled. The same rehearsed, arrogant smile I'd seen at the beginning of the hearing. Fake medals, no pension, Cole said, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. Then he walked out. The clerk gathered papers nervously, avoiding our eyes. Dad sat motionless. I stood, collected our documents, and helped Dad to his feet. Outside, in the hallway, he stopped. Maggie, not here, I said quietly. We made it to the parking lot before he spoke again. Let it go. Dad, please. His voice was tired. He's not worth it. I helped him into the car, stored his cane in the back seat. As I walked around to the driver's side, I pulled out my phone and made one call. It rang twice. General Hale, the voice answered. How's retirement treating you? Cancel my afternoon, I said. I need you to pull everything you have on Judge Everett Cole. And I mean everything. The hearing was supposed to be routine, a renewal of Dad's disability benefits. Instead, it became the moment that changed everything. He'd polished his uniform the night before, medals perfectly aligned on the dress blues he kept wrapped in plastic. I'd watched him through the doorway of his bedroom, the way his hands moved with practiced precision over each ribbon and star. When I was a kid, I'd thought those medals were magic. Now I understood they were just metal and cloth, proof of moments that had cost him pieces of himself. But to Dad, they meant something deeper. They were evidence of a life lived with purpose. When Cole leaned back in his chair and said, "These look like replicas," something inside me stilled. Then louder, so the clerk and the other veterans waiting outside could hear through the thin walls, "Fake medals, no pension." The silence that followed felt heavier than the gavel he slammed down. Dad's jaw tightened, the muscle jumping beneath skin that had gone pale. But he didn't break. Didn't raise his voice. Didn't defend himself, even though I could see the words building behind his pressed lips. He just sat there, back straight, eyes forward, while a man who'd never worn a uniform stripped away his dignity in front of strangers. I smiled, stood, and collected the papers. "Thank you, Your Honor," I said evenly. "I'll handle it from here." Cole was already halfway to the door, done with us, moving on to his next case or his lunch appointment or whatever occupied men who confused power with authority. He thought he'd embarrassed an old soldier, scored some bureaucratic victory, saved the government a few $1,000s. He had no idea who was standing behind him. In the car, Dad stared out the window as I drove. We passed the strip malls and fast food restaurants that line the highway, the kind of American landscape that all looks the same no matter what state you're in. "He didn't mean it," Dad said finally. I glanced at him. Yes, he did. He was just doing his job. No, Dad. He was enjoying himself. Dad's hand rested on his thigh, fingers spread over the knee that didn't work right anymore. "I don't want you making trouble." "I'm not making trouble. Maggie." He turned to look at me. "I know that tone. I know what you're thinking. Let it go." But I couldn't let it go. That smirk, the way Cole had leaned back in his chair like a king on a throne, the calculated cruelty of saying "fake medals" loud enough to be overheard, it played on loop in my mind. This wasn't about bureaucracy or budget cuts or even about Dad's pension. This was about a man who'd discovered he could hurt people without consequences and had developed a taste for it. When we got home, Dad went straight to his room. I heard the closet door open, then close. The sound of something heavy being placed on a shelf. He was putting the uniform away, I realized. Hiding it. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, my phone in front of me. The call to director Samuel Huxley had been brief. He'd said he'd get back to me within the hour. He called back in 40 minutes. "Cole's dirty," Huxley said without preamble. "How dirty?" "Depends on how deep you want to dig." "Surface level?" "He's been skimming from veterans' benefit programs for 3 years, funneling money to his campaign donors." "Deeper?" "He's got offshore accounts in the Caymans and a second house in his wife's maiden name." I closed my eyes. Why hasn't anyone caught this before? Because he's smart. He spreads it thin, keeps the amounts small enough not to trigger automatic reviews. And he's connected state senator's brother-in-law, plays golf with the attorney general. But you found it. I had motivation. There was a pause on the line. Huxley and I had worked together on procurement oversight 3 years back. He'd lost his father to complications from Agent Orange exposure, and the VA had fought the widow's benefits for 2 years. He understood. "What do you need?" he asked. "Everything you just told me, documented. And I need it to come through official channels." "You want to file a complaint?" "I want to bury him." Another pause, longer this time. "Maggie, you're talking about taking down a sitting judge. That's going to generate attention. Questions about why you got involved, what authority you used to initiate the investigation." "I have the authority." "I know you do. I'm asking if you want to use it." Once you pull that trigger, there's no walking it back. I thought about Dad's face in the courtroom, the way he'd gone pale when Cole called his medals fake. The way he'd hidden his uniform as soon as we got home, like it was something to be ashamed of. Pull the trigger, I said. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Dad's hands on his cane, the slight tremor that had nothing to do with his injuries and everything to do with humiliation. People talk about physical wounds like they're the only kind that matter. But there's another type of damage that cuts deeper, the kind that makes you question your own story, doubt your own worth. Cole had done that. He'd taken a man who'd served with honor and made him feel like a fraud. Around 2 a.m, I got up and walked down the hall to Dad's room. The door was ajar. He was awake too, sitting in the chair by the window, staring out at nothing. "Can't sleep?" I asked. He glanced at me. "Old habit. Used to do night watch." I sat on the edge of his bed. "Dad, your medals are real. You know that, right?" "I know. And your service was real. What you did, what you sacrificed, that happened. One asshole in a courtroom doesn't change that." "I know," he said again, but his voice was hollow. We sat in silence for a while. Outside, a dog barked somewhere in the neighborhood. When I was in Kandahar, Dad said suddenly, "We had this interpreter. Local kid, maybe 19. Smart as hell, wanted to be a doctor. One day we're on patrol and we take fire. Everyone's scrambling for cover and this kid, he freezes. Just stands there in the middle of the street. I grabbed him, pulled him behind a wall. Took rounds doing it, but we made it." He paused, fingers drumming on the arm of his chair. 2 days later, that kid's family gets threatened by the Taliban for working with us. They tell him to quit or they'll kill his sister. He quit. Last I heard, he was driving a taxi in Kabul, gave up on medical school. And I remember thinking, was it worth it? Me getting shot to save him, if he ends up driving a taxi anyway. "Dad, I'm not saying it wasn't worth it," he continued. "I'd do it again. But sometimes I wonder if all of it, the years, the deployments, the pieces of myself I left over there, if it actually mattered. If anyone even remembers." I moved to kneel beside his chair, put my hand over his. "It mattered. You mattered. And that judge is wrong. Not just factually wrong, but morally wrong. And he's going to learn that." Dad looked at me, really looked at me, and something in his expression shifted. "What did you do, Maggie?" I smiled. "Nothing yet. But tomorrow, I'm going back to that courthouse." "Why?" "Because someone needs to explain to Judge Cole how ranks work." The next morning, I put on my service uniform. Not the dress blues, but the Army combat uniform with rank insignia clearly visible on my chest and shoulders. I'd earned my stars the hard way, through deployments and strategy sessions and decisions that kept people alive. When I looked in the mirror, I saw what Cole had refused to see in my father: proof of service, evidence of sacrifice. Dad was at the kitchen table when I came downstairs. He looked at my uniform, then at my face. "Maggie, I'm not doing this for revenge," I said. "I'm doing it because it's right." "You don't have to, yeah, Dad?" "I do." The drive to the courthouse took 20 minutes. I'd called ahead, made sure Cole was in session. The clerk who'd witnessed yesterday's hearing saw me coming down the hall and her eyes went wide. I didn't slow down. The courtroom doors were closed but not locked. I pushed through them mid-session, while Cole was berating another veteran about incomplete paperwork. Every head turned. Cole stopped talking, his expression shifting from surprise to irritation. "This is a closed hearing, Brigadier General Maggie Hale," I said clearly. "United States Army Defense Command Strategy Division. I'm here regarding your ruling yesterday in the case of Colonel Mason Hale." Cole's face went through several emotions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, calculation. "General Hale, this is highly irregular. So is accusing a decorated veteran of stolen valor without evidence. I have the authority to request verification. You have the authority to review claims. You don't have the authority to publicly humiliate veterans based on personal bias." His jaw clenched. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're going to want to check your phone first." Cole's hand moved instinctively to his pocket, then stopped. "What?" "Your phone," I repeated. "Check it." He pulled it out slowly, eyes never leaving mine. I watched as he scrolled through notifications, his face slowly draining of color. 3 emails, all marked urgent, all from offices he couldn't ignore. Federal investigators, Pentagon oversight, the Judge's Judicial Review Board. All initiated within the last 18 hours. All pointing to irregularities in his financial disclosures and his handling of veterans' benefit cases. Cole looked up at me. "You did this." "I made one phone call," I said. "To people who care about accountability. The rest? That's all you, Your Honor. Your choices, your corruption, your consequences." He was gripping his phone so hard I thought he might crack the screen. The other veteran who'd been sitting at the table quietly gathered his papers and left. The clerk pretended to organize files. "This is harassment," Cole said. "This is oversight. Something you should have been subject to years ago." His hand was shaking now, rage or fear or both. "I'll fight this." "You can try." I took a step closer. "But here's what's going to happen. Every case you've decided in the last 3 years is going to be reviewed. Every veteran you've denied, every benefit you've suspended, every ruling you've made, it's all going to be examined by people who understand what service actually means. And when they find the pattern, when they see how you've targeted veterans specifically, how you've used your position to skim money from programs designed to help people who've sacrificed everything," I paused. "They're going to destroy you." Cole sank into his chair. All the arrogance, all the rehearsed superiority, it was gone. What remained was a small man who'd confused power with impunity and was just now realizing the difference. "My father's medals are real," I said quietly. "They're registered with the Defense Department. His service is documented and verified. His injuries are permanent and debilitating. And his pension is going to be reinstated by end of business today, with back pay for the suspension you illegally imposed." I turned to leave, then stopped. "One more thing. That smirk you gave him yesterday? When you said fake medals, no pension. I hope it was worth it. Because it's the last time you'll ever sit behind that bench." I walked out. Behind me, I heard the sound of Cole's phone hitting the desk, then his voice, small and desperate, calling someone. His lawyer, probably. Or his wife. It didn't matter. The machinery was in motion, and nothing he could say or do would stop it now. Outside, the morning sun was bright. I drove home slowly, not rushing, letting the adrenaline fade. When I pulled into the driveway, Dad was on the porch. He stood as I got out of the car, using his cane for balance. "How'd it go?" he asked. I climbed the steps to stand beside him. Justice happened. He studied my face, then nodded slowly. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. You're going to have to deal with reporters once this breaks. And there'll be questions about why you didn't report him before." "I can handle questions." We stood there for a moment, looking out at the quiet street. "Your mother would have done the same thing," Dad said. "She never let anyone dishonor the uniform." I thought about Mom, the way she'd stood beside Dad through every deployment, every reassignment, every hard year. The way she'd fought the VA for his benefits after his injury, spent hours on hold with bureaucrats who didn't care. "She taught me well," I said. "My father, Colonel Mason Hale, taught me more about restraint than any academy ever could. He never bragged about his service, he honored it through how he lived. There was no uniform on display in our living room, no medals framed above the mantel. The only indication that he'd spent 22 years in the Army was the way he folded his clothes, the corners sharp enough to draw blood, and the fact that he woke every morning at 0500 regardless of whether he had anywhere to be. He'd been shot twice, decorated 3 times, and still mowed the lawn himself until the day his leg gave out for good. That was 3 years ago now. I'd come home for Thanksgiving and found him on the ground beside the mower, face gray with pain, trying to stand without letting on that he couldn't. Just taking a break, he'd said when I rushed over. Don't fuss. But I'd seen the way his hands shook as I helped him up, felt the dead weight of his left leg. That was the day he finally admitted he needed the cane. When Mom died 2 years before that, he didn't cry. Not at the funeral, not at the grave, not during the long weeks after when the house echoed with her absence. He saluted her photo instead, the one from their wedding day, her in white and him in his dress uniform. Every morning before breakfast, every night before bed. It was the only goodbye he knew how to give. That kind of strength leaves a mark. Not the kind that makes you hard, but the kind that shows you what matters and what doesn't. Dad never raised his voice, never made threats, never needed to prove anything to anyone. He just existed in a way that made you want to be better. I followed him into service, though not down the same path. While he'd been infantry, leading soldiers through deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, I went into intelligence. Started as a second lieutenant doing signal analysis, reading intercepted communications and mapping enemy movements. Turned out I was good at seeing patterns, at understanding not just what people said, but what they meant. That got me noticed. By 30, I was running counterintelligence operations out of Fort Meade. By 33, I'd been promoted to colonel and moved to the Pentagon, working in strategic oversight. At 35, I made brigadier general and took over the Defense Command Strategy Division, a position that came with clearance levels that most senators didn't have and responsibilities that I couldn't discuss with anyone outside secure facilities. Dad used to joke, "You outrun me in every way except stubbornness." But it wasn't competition. It was continuation. He'd built his career on leading people through impossible situations. I'd built mine on making sure those situations didn't happen in the first place. Different paths, same destination, protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. The morning after Cole's hearing, I was supposed to fly back to D.C. I had meetings scheduled, briefings to attend, 100 things that required my attention. Instead, I called my deputy and told her to reschedule everything. "Family emergency?" she asked. Something like that. I spent the day with Dad, not talking about Cole or the hearing or what would happen next. We watched old westerns on TV, the kind where the good guys always won and justice was simple. During the commercials, I'd catch him looking at me, this expression on his face that I couldn't quite read. Pride, maybe. Or concern. "You know I'll be fine," he said during one break. "I've dealt with worse than a crooked judge." "I know. So why are you still here?" I thought about how to answer that. "Because you taught me that showing up matters. Being present when things get hard. You did that for me my whole life." "That's different. You're my kid. And you're my father." He smiled at that, just a little. "Fair enough." That night, I made dinner, nothing fancy, just spaghetti and garlic bread. Dad set the table with the precision of someone who'd spent decades in mess halls where everything had its place. We ate in comfortable silence, the kind you can only have with people who've known you long enough that words are optional. Afterward, washing dishes side by side, he said, "Your mother would have liked seeing you in that uniform." I glanced at him. Yeah. She always said you'd go further than both of us combined." I told her you already had. The metal case was still locked. It sat on the shelf in his bedroom closet, a wooden box with brass hinges that held his Purple Heart, his Bronze Star, his combat infantry badge, and half a dozen other decorations I'd seen him wear exactly twice. Once at my academy graduation and once at Mom's funeral. They'd been the center of yesterday's humiliation. The fake medals Cole had accused him of buying online like some wannabe trying to impress people at bars. "Dad," I said, setting down the dish I'd been drying. "I need to tell you something." He turned off the water, wiped his hands on a towel. "Okay. When Cole suspended your pension yesterday, he violated about 6 different regulations. And when he accused you of stolen valor without evidence, he opened himself up to a federal investigation." Dad's expression didn't change. "How do you know that?" "Because I initiated the investigation." He was quiet for a long moment. "Maggie, before you say it was wrong, before you tell me I shouldn't have used my position, just know that I didn't do anything illegal. I made a phone call to someone I work with, someone whose job is Pentagon legal oversight." I told him about Cole. He looked into it. What he found had nothing to do with you and everything to do with Cole being corrupt. And if he hadn't found anything, then I would have dropped it. I met his eyes. "But I knew he would find something, Dad. Because men like Cole don't stop at one victim. They build patterns. And patterns leave evidence." Dad leaned against the counter, processing. "What's going to happen to him?" "He'll be investigated, probably suspended while they review his cases. If they find what I think they'll find, financial irregularities, systematic bias against veterans, he'll be disbarred. Maybe prosecuted. And you'll be connected to it. Maybe. That could hurt your career." I shrugged. "Some things are worth the risk." He studied me for a long time. Finally, he said, "You know, when you were little, maybe 7 or 8, some kid at school was bullying one of your friends. You came home crying, not because you were hurt, but because you hadn't been able to stop it. You felt helpless." I remembered. A boy named Kevin had been picking on Sarah Martinez, a quiet girl who wore thick glasses and read during recess. He'd stolen her books, called her names, pushed her off the swings. I'd tried to intervene and he'd laughed at me. "Your mother told you that feeling helpless is worse than feeling hurt. That sometimes the only way to stop feeling helpless is to do something, even if it's hard. Even if it costs you." Dad smiled faintly. "I think about that sometimes. How you never stopped being that kid who couldn't stand to see people hurt. You just got better weapons." The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from Director Huxley. "Investigation is official. DoD Inspector General's office taking point. You're in the clear." I showed Dad the message over breakfast. He read it, then handed back the phone. "Thank you," he said simply. I wanted to tell him he didn't need to thank me, that this was what family did, that I'd do it 1,000 times over. But I just nodded and poured him more coffee. We spent the rest of my leave doing ordinary things, going to the grocery store, sitting on the porch watching cars drive by, talking about nothing important. It was the kind of time I'd been too busy for over the years, the kind I'd always assumed we'd have more of. Now I knew better. The day before I flew back to DC, Dad asked me to help him with something in the garage. I followed him out, wondering what project he'd taken on now. Instead, he opened a cardboard box I'd never seen before and pulled out Mom's wedding dress, carefully preserved in plastic. "Your mother wanted you to have this," he said. "When you were ready." I touched the plastic, feeling the fabric beneath. "Why now?" "Because watching you this week, the way you handled Cole, the way you knew exactly what to do, it reminded me that you're not just my daughter anymore. You're the person we raised you to be." His voice was rough. "And your mother would want you to know that we're proud. Not of your rank or your position, but of who you are when those things get stripped away. The person who shows up. The person who fights for what's right even when it's hard." I hugged him then, carefully, aware of his bad leg and his chronic pain and the years that had made him frilier than I wanted to admit. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, kiddo." That night, I repacked my bag and laid out my uniform for the morning flight. The wedding dress was folded carefully in a separate bag, something to keep in my apartment in DC, a reminder of where I came from and why I did what I did. Before bed, I walked past Dad's room and saw the lights still on. He was sitting in his chair again, but this time the metal case was open on his lap. He wasn't looking at the medals themselves, but at the photos tucked inside the lid, pictures of his unit, men he'd served with, some who'd made it home and some who hadn't. "Can't sleep?" I asked from the doorway. He glanced up. "Just remembering." "Anything in particular?" He traced a finger over one photo, a group shot taken in Afghanistan, everyone dusty and tired and grinning anyway. "Just thinking about how strange it is. You spend all these years trying to do the right thing, trying to serve honorably, and at the end of it, you're still just an old man with some metal in a box. Wondering if any of it mattered." I walked over and knelt beside his chair. "It mattered, Dad. Every deployment, every decision, every soldier you led, it all mattered. And those medals aren't just metal. They're proof that when it counted, you were there. You showed up. That's what service means." He closed the case gently. "Cole almost made me forget that. But he didn't. Because you're stronger than his cruelty." Dad looked at me, his eyes tired but clear. "I'm glad you're my daughter, Maggie. I'm glad you're my father." The next morning, he drove me to the airport. We didn't talk much during the ride, just listened to the radio and watched the sunrise paint the sky orange and pink. At the terminal, he pulled up to departures and put the car in park. "You'll call when you land?" "I always do." "And you'll be careful?" "Whatever blowback comes from this Cole situation, I'll handle it, Dad." He nodded, then reached over and squeezed my hand. "Go do what you do best. Keep people safe." I grabbed my bags and watched him drive away, his hand raised in a wave out the window. As I walked toward security, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Federal investigation launched into County Judge Everett Cole, allegations of financial misconduct and bias against veterans. I smiled and kept walking. The machinery was in motion. Justice was coming. And I'd learned from the best how to be patient while it arrived. Dad didn't want to talk about it. The day after the hearing, after I'd returned to DC and my regular life had resumed, I called him to check in. "Let it go, Maggie," he said when I brought up Cole. "He's not worth the uniform." But I could hear it in his voice, the weight that hadn't been there before. Like something fundamental had shifted in how he saw himself, in his place in the world. For 22 years, he'd known who he was: Colonel Mason Hale, United States Army, a man who'd served with honor. Now there was doubt in his voice, hesitation. And that was worse than any physical injury Cole could have inflicted. His silence spoke louder than any outburst. When I called the next day, he talked about the weather and the neighbors and whether he should replace the water heater. When I asked about the pension suspension, he changed the subject. When I asked if he'd heard from the VA, he said he hadn't checked his messages. This was a man who'd faced enemy fire without flinching, who'd led soldiers through ambushes and IED-laden roads, who'd continued his mission with a shattered leg and a back full of shrapnel. But one crooked judge with a smirk had done what the Taliban couldn't, made him doubt his own story. The medals stayed locked in their case after that. I found out from his neighbor, Mrs. Chin, who'd called to check on me. "Your father seemed off," she said. "I invited him to the Veterans Day ceremony at the church, and he said he wasn't feeling up to it. Mason never misses that ceremony." "Maybe he's just tired," I offered, though I didn't believe it. "Maybe. But when I saw him taking out the trash yesterday, he wasn't wearing his army cap. He always wears that cap. Such a small thing. A ball cap with his unit insignia, the kind millions of veterans wore with pride. But now it stayed in the closet with the uniform and the medals, hidden away like evidence of something shameful. I'd catch him looking at them sometimes, not out of pride, but shame." I flew home 3 weeks after the hearing, told him I had some leave time. Really, I just needed to see him, to understand what Cole had taken. I found him in the garage organizing tools that didn't need organizing. "Hey, Dad." He looked up, surprise crossing his face. "Maggie. I thought you weren't coming until Thanksgiving. Changed my mind. Figured I could help with that water heater." We worked in silence for a while, him handing me tools, me pretending I knew what I was doing with the plumbing. Finally, I said, "Mrs. Chin told me you skipped the Veterans Day ceremony." His hands stilled. "Wasn't feeling well." "Dad." "It's fine, Maggie. I just didn't feel like going. Because of Cole." He set down the wrench he'd been holding. "Because I looked at those veterans, all of them with their medals and their pride, and I wondered if they were looking at me thinking I was a fraud. Thinking I bought my medals online. Thinking I was one of those guys who lies about his service to get benefits. Nobody thinks that. Cole did. And if he thought it, maybe others do too." And that's when it hit me: humiliation is the quietest kind of cruelty. It doesn't leave visible scars. It doesn't require physical violence. It just plants a seed of doubt that grows in the dark, poisoning everything it touches. Cole hadn't just denied Dad a pension, he'd stripped away dignity. He'd taken a man who'd spent decades building a reputation for honor and integrity and reduced him to a suspect, someone who had to prove he wasn't a liar. The accusation itself was the punishment, regardless of truth. I watched Dad's hands shake slightly as he picked up the wrench again, and I made a decision. That night, after he'd gone to bed, I sat in his living room with my laptop and started digging through court archives and grant ledgers. Cole's name appeared in dozens of documents. Veterans benefit hearings, disability reviews, pension appeals. I cross-referenced the outcomes with the veteran service records, the ones I could access through my clearance. A pattern emerged quickly. Veterans with documented combat injuries, legitimate medical conditions, verified service records, denied at rates far higher than the national average. And always with the same reasoning: insufficient documentation, questionable claims, need for further investigation. But veterans without combat experience, those seeking benefits for non-service connected issues, administrative positions, approved at normal rates. Cole was targeting combat veterans specifically. And the more decorated they were, the harder he pushed back. I found 12 cases in the past 3 years where he'd questioned the authenticity of medals. 7 where he'd suggested veterans were exaggerating injuries. 4 where he'd accused veterans of stolen valor outright. None of those accusations had been substantiated. None had led to investigations or charges. They were just tools of humiliation, ways to make proud men feel small. Then I found the money trail. Cole chaired the board that distributed grants to veteran service organizations. Federal funds, state funds, private donations, all filtered through a committee he controlled. And the organizations that received the largest grants shared board members with Cole's campaign donors. The organizations that actually served veterans, the ones that helped with housing and mental health and job training, they got scraps. I traced the funds through shell companies and holding corporations, the kind of financial architecture that takes time and expertise to build. Cole had been siphoning money for years, probably since he first took the bench. Money meant for homeless veterans went to luxury condos in Florida. Money for PTSD treatment went to offshore accounts. Money for job training went to political campaigns. It wasn't just corruption. It was calculated theft from the people least able to fight back. What I found wasn't revenge material. It was justice waiting to happen. And I had the authority, the clearance, and the connections to make it happen. All I needed was the will to pull the trigger, knowing that once I did, there was no walking it back. I called Director Huxley that night, even though it was past midnight. He answered on the second ring. Maggie, this better be good. Judge Everett Cole. How much do you know about him? There was a pause. Why? Because I'm looking at evidence of systematic fraud targeting veterans. And I need to know if you're willing to help me burn him down. Another pause, longer this time. Send me what you have. I spent the next 2 hours compiling a report. Financial records, case outcomes, testimony transcripts. I organized it like an intelligence brief, with executive summaries and supporting documentation and recommendations for action. By the time I hit send, the sun was coming up. Dad found me asleep at the kitchen table, laptop still open. Maggie? I jerked awake. Hey, Dad. What are you doing? I closed the laptop. Just some work stuff. Couldn't sleep. He looked at me for a long moment, this expression on his face like he knew I was lying, but wasn't sure if he should push. Finally, he just nodded and started making coffee. Huxley called back at 9. Holy shit, Maggie. I know. This is bigger than I thought. If even half of this is accurate, it's all accurate. I verified everything. Then Cole's not just corrupt. He's running a criminal enterprise using the bench as cover. Can you move on it? Huxley was quiet. Yeah, but once we start this, it's going to get ugly. Cole's connected. He's going to fight back, and he's going to come after whoever initiated the investigation. Let him try. Maggie, I need you to be sure about this. This isn't like our usual work. This is personal. And if it looks like you used your position to target someone who ruled against your father, it's not about my father, I interrupted. I mean, it started there. But this is about 12 veterans he's humiliated. Hundreds he's denied benefits. Thousands whose money he's stolen. This is about the next veteran who walks into his courtroom and gets told their service doesn't matter. Huxley sighed. Okay, give me 48 hours. I'll loop in the Inspector General's office and the DOJ. We'll need to do this by the book, no shortcuts, no appearance of bias. Understood. And Maggie? Your father, he know what you're doing. I glanced toward the living room, where Dad was watching the morning news. Not yet. You should tell him. I will. When it's done. The next 2 days moved slowly. I stayed at Dad's house, helping with projects, cooking meals, trying to act normal while I waited for Huxley's call. Dad knew something was up. He kept watching me with that concerned parent expression, like he wanted to ask what was wrong but didn't want to pry. On the third morning, my phone rang. Huxley's name on the screen. We're moving, he said. Inspector General's office is opening a formal investigation. DOJ is reviewing for potential criminal charges. We've got warrants for his financial records, and we're interviewing the veterans whose cases he presided over. How long until he knows? He probably already knows. His bank called him this morning about the subpoena for his accounts. I looked out the window, thinking about Cole waking up to find his carefully constructed empire crumbling. Good. Maggie, there's going to be blowback. The judge's allies are going to ask questions about how this investigation started. Your name's going to come up. I can handle it. I know you can. Just wanted you to be prepared. After I hung up, I found Dad in his study, reading a book on World War II strategy. He looked up when I entered. Everything okay? Dad, I need to tell you something. He closed the book, his full attention on me. Okay. I sat down across from him and explained everything, the research I'd done, the evidence I'd found, the investigation I'd initiated. He listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. When I finished, the silence stretched between us. You didn't have to do that, he said finally. Yes, I did. Maggie, Dad, he's been doing this for years. To dozens of veterans. He's stealing from them, humiliating them, denying them benefits they earned. Someone had to stop him. Dad's hands gripped the arms of his chair. But it didn't have to be you. You're risking your career. Some things are more important than careers. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before: fear. Not for himself, but for me. Your mother and I, we always wanted you to be safe. To have a life that didn't involve fighting other people's battles. You taught me that the fights worth having are the ones for people who can't fight for themselves. I taught you to survive, he said, his voice rough. To be smart, to pick your battles. I am being smart. And I picked this battle because it's the right one. We sat there for a long moment. Finally, Dad nodded slowly. Okay, but you promised me something. What? You promised me that whatever happens, you won't regret this. That years from now, when you look back, you'll still believe it was worth it. I met his eyes. I promise. That afternoon, the news broke. Local stations first, then regional, then national. Judge under federal investigation for fraud and abuse of authority. Dad and I watched the coverage together, his hand gripping mine. On screen, reporters stood outside the courthouse, cameras capturing federal agents carrying boxes of evidence. Cole's lawyer gave a statement about presumption of innocence and political witch hunts. But his voice lacked conviction. By evening, more details had emerged. The offshore accounts, the shell companies, the pattern of denials targeting combat veterans. Interviews with veterans who'd been denied benefits, some of them in tears describing what those denials had cost them. One man, a Marine who'd lost both legs in Fallujah, described how Cole had questioned whether his injuries were really service-connected. He looked at me like I was trying to scam the system, the Marine said. Like I chose to have my legs blown off for a monthly check. Dad's grip on my hand tightened. I didn't know it was that bad. Neither did anyone else. That's why he got away with it for so long. We watched until the coverage started repeating itself, then Dad turned off the TV. Thank you, he said quietly. Don't thank me yet. This is just the beginning. But he shook his head. No. Thank you for showing me that my service still matters. That someone was willing to fight for it. It always mattered, Dad. Cole just tried to make you forget that. He stood, using his cane for balance, and walked to his study. A few minutes later, he returned with the metal case. He set it on the coffee table and opened it, looking at the decorations he'd locked away. I think I'd like to wear these to the Veterans Day ceremony next year, he said. If they'll still have me. I smiled. They'll have you. I made one call, to Director Samuel Huxley, Pentagon Legal Oversight. He answered on the second ring, his voice alert despite the early hour. Maggie, what can I do for you? I need everything you can find on Judge Everett Cole. County Veterans Court, Eastern District. There was a brief pause. I could hear him typing. Cole, he asked, his tone sharpening. That name rings dirty. It's about to ring louder, I said. How fast can you pull his financial records? With your authorization? Fast. What am I looking for? Fraud, embezzlement, systematic bias. Start with his role on the Veterans Benefits Oversight Committee and work backward. Look for patterns in his case rulings, especially denials of combat veterans' claims. More typing then. This official? As of now, yes. I'm initiating a preliminary inquiry under my authority as Brigadier General. If you find what I think you'll find, we'll escalate to a full investigation. Huxley was quiet for a moment. This is about your father. It wasn't a question. This is about my father and every other veteran Cole's targeted. But if you need me to recuse myself, no, Huxley cut in. I'm asking because I want to know how hard to push. And if it's personal for you, I know you've done your homework. I've done my homework. Good. Give me 6 hours. He called back in 4. Maggie, you need to see this. I'm sending you an encrypted file right now. I opened my laptop and accessed the secure server. The document that appeared was over 200 pages long, organized into sections with highlighted areas marking the most damning evidence. I scrolled through, my jaw tightening with each page. Shell corporations with Cole's wife's signature. Bank transfers from the Veterans Benefits Fund to offshore accounts in the Caymans. Real estate purchases under LLCs that traced back to Cole's family. Political donations that exactly matched amounts siphoned from grant programs. How much? I asked. Conservative estimate? $3.2 million over 6 years. And that's just what I can prove in 4 hours. Give me a full audit, and it'll be double that. What about the case rulings? That's the interesting part. He's not randomly corrupt, he's systematically targeting specific veterans. Combat decorated officers, enlisted with Purple Hearts, anyone with high-profile service. His denial rate for Medal of Honor recipients is 90%. 90%, Maggie. The national average is 12. I closed my eyes. He's humiliating them on purpose. Looks that way. My guess? He's building a narrative that all combat veterans are frauds, which justifies his theft from their programs. If they're all liars anyway, who cares if the money gets redirected? That's sociopathic. That's Cole. I took a breath, steadying myself. What do we need for a full investigation? DoD Inspector General's office will want to review everything I've found. If they agree there's sufficient evidence, they'll refer it to DOJ for criminal prosecution. We'll also need to loop in the Judicial Review Board. He'll need to be suspended pending investigation. How long? For the investigation to start? I can have it moving by end of day. For him to face consequences? Depends on how fast the IG moves and whether DOJ wants to prosecute. Could be months. That's not fast enough. Huxley paused. What are you thinking? I'm thinking Cole needs to know right now that his world is ending. That the people he's been stealing from aren't powerless. Maggie, can you have the IG's office call him directly? Today? That's irregular. But possible? Another pause. Possible. But if you're planning what I think you're planning, I'm just planning to attend a court hearing. Public courtroom, open to anyone. Huxley sighed. Okay, I'll make the calls. But be careful. Cornered men do stupid things. So do angry generals. Within hours, we had a dossier that would end Cole's career and probably his freedom. Financial records, case transcripts, testimony from veterans he'd denied. Pattern evidence showing systematic bias. Communication records proving coordination between his court and the political donors who benefited from redirected funds. It was comprehensive, damning, and legally airtight. I forwarded everything to my own secure drive, then made 3 more calls. First to the DoD Inspector General, formally requesting an investigation. Second to the Judicial Review Board, filing a complaint about Cole's conduct. Third to a reporter I'd worked with on a military procurement scandal 2 years earlier, someone who understood how to report on corruption without sensationalizing it. Got something for me? She asked. Judge Everett Cole, Eastern District. Pentagon investigation launching today for fraud and systematic abuse of veterans. I can't be your source on record, but I can point you toward the public documents that'll confirm everything. How big? Federal case big. Criminal prosecution likely. Pattern of abuse spanning years. She whistled. I'll have a team on it within the hour. Any particular angle you want emphasized? The veterans. The people he hurt. This isn't about a corrupt judge, it's about the men and women whose lives he destroyed while stealing money meant to help them. Got it. And Maggie? Thanks for the tip. Thank you for caring enough to do it right. After I hung up, I sat in my Pentagon office and looked out at the parking lot below. Sunset was painting the sky orange and purple, the kind of evening that usually made me think about getting home, making dinner, decompressing from the day. Instead, I was thinking about Dad's face when Cole had called his medals fake. The way his hand had trembled on his cane. The shame in his eyes when he'd locked those medals away. And I felt absolutely no guilt about what I was about to do. The next day, I initiated an internal review under my authority as Brigadier General Maggie Hale. It was documented, official, completely within my rights as someone responsible for Pentagon oversight. I wasn't hiding behind my rank, I was using it exactly as intended, to ensure military personnel and veterans were treated with the respect and fairness they'd earned. Then I walked into his courtroom. No uniform this time, just a black suit and steady eyes. I wanted him to see me as myself, not as a general. Wanted him to understand that power doesn't always come with decorations and insignia. Sometimes it just comes with conviction. The courtroom was in session when I arrived, Cole presiding over another veteran's disability hearing. This one was younger, maybe 30, with a prosthetic arm visible below his short-sleeve shirt. Cole was questioning him about whether the injury really prevented him from working. Plenty of people have prosthetics and hold jobs, Cole was saying. What makes you think you deserve special treatment? The veteran's jaw was clenched. I'm not asking for special treatment, Your Honor. I'm asking for the benefits I was promised when I enlisted. Promises don't pay bills. I walked down the center aisle, my footsteps loud in the quiet courtroom. Cole glanced up, irritation crossing his face. Ma'am, this is a closed hearing, public courtroom, I said evenly. Open to anyone who wants to observe. I took a seat in the gallery, directly in his line of sight. He stared at me for a moment, trying to place my face. Then recognition flickered. You look familiar, Cole said. I'm sure I do, I replied. You'll remember me in about 10 minutes. His eyes narrowed, but he turned back to the veteran. As I was saying, my phone buzzed. Not a call, just a text from Huxley, IG making contact now. I checked my watch. Right on time. Cole was mid-sentence when his own phone buzzed on the bench. He glanced at it, annoyed, then back to the veteran. It buzzed again. Then again. He picked it up, his expression shifting from annoyance to confusion to something approaching alarm as he scrolled through the notifications. I watched his face strain of color, the progression happening in real time. First the confusion as he saw the caller ID, Inspector General's office. Then the dawning realization as he read the subject lines on the emails flooding in. Federal investigation. Judicial review. Subpoena for financial records. Suspension pending inquiry. Your Honor, the veteran prompted. Are we continuing? Cole didn't answer. He was staring at his phone like it was a grenade with the pin pulled. His hand shook slightly as he scrolled through message after message. We need to recess, he managed. This hearing is continued. But Your Honor, I took the day off work to be here. I said we're continued. Cole's voice cracked. The veteran gathered his papers, shooting me a confused glance as he left. The clerk pretended to organize files, clearly uncomfortable. When the room had mostly cleared, I stood. Problem, Your Honor? Cole looked up at me, his face now paper white. Who are you? Brigadier General Maggie Hale. United States Army. Defense Command Strategy Division. I walked closer to the bench. You met my father last week. Colonel Mason Hale. You accused him of wearing fake medals. Cole's mouth opened, closed. That was a routine verification request. That was slander. Based on nothing but your personal enjoyment of humiliation. You can't prove, I don't have to prove your motivation. I just have to prove your actions. Which I did. Thoroughly. I pulled a folder from my bag and set it on the bench. That's a copy of the dossier currently being reviewed by the Inspector General's office. 3.2 million in fraudulent transactions. Systematic bias against combat veterans. Coordination with political donors to redirect funds from veteran services. It's all there. Bank records, case transcripts, pattern analysis. Cole's hand hovered over the folder, but didn't touch it, like it might burn him. You can't do this. I already did. The investigation launched 40 minutes ago. By now, federal agents are probably at your bank. Your lawyers are likely trying to reach you. And tomorrow morning, every news outlet in the region will be running the story. You're doing this because I ruled against your father. I'm doing this because you've been stealing from veterans and destroying their lives for years. My father was just the mistake that brought you to my attention. Cole sank into his chair. All the arrogance, all the rehearsed superiority he displayed last week, it was gone. What remained was a small man who'd confused authority with immunity and was just now understanding the difference. What do you want? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I want you to understand something. I leaned forward. Every veteran you denied, every Purple Heart recipient you called a fraud, every combat-decorated officer you humiliated, they weren't powerless. They just didn't have the tools to fight back. But I do. His phone buzzed again. He flinched. You're going to spend the next few months watching everything you built collapse, I continued. Your career, your reputation, probably your freedom. And, through all of it, I want you to remember my father's face when you called his medals fake. I want you to remember that smirk you gave him. Because that moment? That's what ended you. I turned to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and Your Honor? My father's pension is going to be reinstated by close of business today, with full back pay for the suspension you illegally imposed. Any questions about that? You can take them up with the Inspector General. I walked out. Behind me, I heard the sound of Cole's phone hitting the bench, then his voice, desperate and small, trying to call someone. His lawyer, his wife, someone who might be able to fix this. But there was nothing to fix. The machinery was in motion, and no amount of connections or legal maneuvering would stop it now. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright. I called Dad from the parking lot. Hey, kiddo, he answered. Everything okay? Everything's perfect, I said. Your pension's being reinstated today. Silence on the line. Then, Maggie, what did you do? Just made one call, Dad. That's all it took. The phone buzzed mid-session. Cole tried to keep his composure as he listened, but his face drained of color in stages, from healthy tan to pale gray to an almost greenish white. His hand gripped the phone so hard his knuckles turned bone white. Whatever he was hearing, it was destroying him in real time. I understand, he said finally, his voice barely audible. Yes, I understand. He set the phone down carefully, like it might shatter. Suspension pending investigation. Every case he'd ruled on in 3 years subject to review. Federal agents authorized to seize his financial records. Criminal referral to the Department of Justice for fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of authority under color of law. Every smug ounce of superiority evaporated. The man who'd sat on that bench like a king last week now looked like exactly what he was, a petty criminal who'd been caught. Your Honor, the clerk asked nervously. Should I clear your calendar? Cole didn't answer. He just stood, gathered his things with shaking hands, and walked out of his own courtroom. I stayed in my seat for a moment, watching him go. No triumph, no satisfaction. Just the quiet certainty that justice, delayed but not denied, had finally arrived. By evening, the headlines hit, Judge Everett Cole under federal review for misconduct and fraud. The story spread fast. Local news picked it up first, then regional outlets, then national cable news. By 9 p.m., Cole's face was on every major network, accompanied by graphics showing the money trail and interviews with veterans he'd denied. One interview stood out, a retired master sergeant who'd lost a dad called that night, his voice lighter than I'd heard in months. Maggie. Just my name, but there was something different in how he said it, relief, maybe, or the first stirrings of peace. Hey, Dad. You okay? I just watched the news, he said. They're saying Cole stole millions. That he targeted veterans specifically. Yeah, looks that way. There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing, could picture him sitting in his chair by the window, the metal case probably still locked in his closet, but maybe not for much longer. Seems the world's finally fair again, he said quietly. Maybe. For now. No, he insisted. Don't diminish it. What you did, what happened, it matters. All those veterans he hurt, they'll get their benefits reinstated. Their dignity restored. That's not small, Maggie. I felt something tight in my chest loosen slightly. I'm glad you see it that way. How else would I see it? Justice is justice, even when it comes late. We talked for another 20 minutes about nothing important. What he'd had for dinner, whether his neighbor's dog had stopped barking at night, when I might visit again. Normal things, the kind of conversation we'd been unable to have for weeks because the weight of humiliation had been sitting between us, unspoken but suffocating. Before we hung up, he said, "Thank you for remembering what I taught you." What's that? That dignity isn't something people can take away. They can obscure it, attack it, try to bury it. But it's still there. You just proved that. I didn't tell him I'd pulled the strings. Didn't mention the calls I'd made, the investigation I'd initiated, the hours I'd spent building a case that would end Cole's career. He didn't need to know. What mattered was that he heard the news and felt vindicated, felt seen, felt like the world had corrected itself without him having to beg for it. Get some rest, Dad. You too, kiddo. And Maggie. Yeah, your mother would be proud. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment overlooking the Potomac and watched the city lights reflect off the water. Somewhere across town, Cole was probably meeting with lawyers, trying to figure out how to minimize the damage. His wife was likely packing bags, his friends were distancing themselves, his colleagues were issuing statements about how they'd always had concerns. The machinery of consequences was thorough once it started moving. My phone buzzed with a text from Huxley, DOJ moving forward with prosecution. Judicial Board suspended him effective immediately. You did good work. I didn't respond. This wasn't about doing good work. It was about doing necessary work, the kind that doesn't feel satisfying because it should never have been needed in the first place. The kind that leaves you tired instead of triumphant, aware that for every Cole who gets caught, there are dozens more who don't. But tonight, at least, one veteran could sleep easier. One father could look at his medals without shame. One man who'd given 22 years of his life in service could turn on the news and see that his sacrifice hadn't been forgotten, that someone had been paying attention, that justice, however delayed, however imperfect, still existed. I thought about Dad reopening the medal case, taking out his uniform, maybe wearing it to the next Veterans Day ceremony. I thought about him standing a little straighter, the weight of humiliation finally lifted from shoulders that had carried so much already. And I realized that this was what power was for, not the rank or the clearance or the authority, but the ability to stand between cruelty and its victims and say, not this time, not on my watch. The city lights blurred slightly. I blinked and they came back into focus. Tomorrow, I'd return to my regular work, briefings and strategy sessions and the endless complicated business of keeping people safe. But tonight, I'd made one call and changed one man's life. My father's life. And sometimes, that was enough. I picked up my phone and texted Dad, love you. Proud to be your daughter. His response came quickly, love you too. Proud you're my girl. Always have been. I set the phone down and finally, for the first time in weeks, felt like I could breathe. Thanks for watching. If this hit home, tap like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that dignity isn't negotiable. Your turn. Have you ever had to challenge someone in power to protect a loved one? What would you have done the moment the judge said, fake medals? Where did you draw the line, and what did it cost you? If you could say one sentence to Judge Cole, what would it be? Drop your story below. I read every comment.